Good evening and welcome to BATV News. I'm Kalila Reynolds. A state of emergency has been declared in the parish of St. James. Prime Minister Andrew Holness made the announcement this afternoon at a press conference at Jamaica House. The Prime Minister says he made the decision after receiving advice from the security forces. He says crime in the parish has increased to troubling proportions and must be addressed with a firm response from the government. The government has been under increasing pressure to do something about the country's crime problem. Earlier this week, the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce's quarterly Business and Consumer Confidence Survey listed crime as the #1 concern among business people yet again. Andrew Laidley reports.
The Office of the Prime Minister called a snap press conference this afternoon to announce a state of emergency in the parish of St. James. This is the second state of emergency following the 2010 Dudus incursion in Tivoli Gardens.
I wrote to the Governor General recommending the declaration of a state of public emergency for the parish of St. James. The Governor General has signed a proclamation dated and effective 18th of January 2018. The proclamation has been gazetted. A state of public emergency is now in effect for the parish of St. James.
So why now and why St. James?
The government has been contemplating this action for some time. This is not an action that can be taken in an arbitrary way. It requires a great deal of planning, and it is not just an action for show. It is an action where we have to plan out both the opening and the ending game. And that kind of planning takes time. But more importantly, it takes resources to be behind it. And I believe that we are now at the point where the actions are now aligned with resources.
The Prime Minister, along with JDF Chief of Defense Staff Major General Rocky Meade and National Security Minister Robert Montague, assured the public that human rights won't be curtailed.
The troops have been refreshed in their training of human rights and how to engage with citizens, and all citizens of Jamaica, including the violence producers, can feel safe in the hands of the military as long as you are not threatening the troops.
So what can St. James residents expect?
You may be stopped at various checkpoints. You may be asked for information to verify your identity. You may be asked to declare whether you have any offensive weapons or anything else to declare. And then you may be asked to facilitate a search of your vehicle and yourselves. We ask that you cooperate with the troops.
The state of emergency comes just 3 months after the Prime Minister declared Mount Salem in St. James the country's first zone of special operations, ZOSO. Although he maintains that ZOSO has been successful, Police Commissioner George Quayler says the parish recorded the highest number of murders in Jamaica's history last year.
Last year, there were 335 murders in the parish. This is almost twice that of any other parish, with Clarendon having 168 murders over the same period.
The proclamation by the Governor General says the state of emergency will remain in force for at least 14 days and as long as 3 months. Prime Minister Holness says for security reasons, he's not revealing how long it will be in effect. For BATV News, I'm Andrew Laidley.
Meanwhile, several members of the private sector are weighing in this evening on the state of emergency. Many say they're in support of the government's move, but they're also calling on the Holness administration to see how long the state of emergency will last. They say the longer it stays in effect, the more fallout they will experience in business. Kaniel Gale reports.
President of the Montego Bay Chamber of Commerce, Tashura Gibbs, says it didn't have to come to this. But she says the chamber fully supports the government in its move to address the crime problem, especially in the parish of St. James.
It's quite unfortunate that this had to come to this. We knew that if we didn't cauterize the situation, it would have gotten to a place where it is at today. It's unfortunate, but the fact that the Prime Minister has now declared St. James in a state of emergency. It's something that the Chamber will support. I am just hoping that there is a program that follows because, a state of emergency and then what? So there will be another program that follows because I don't believe we're going to be in a state of emergency indefinitely.
She says many members of her organization have raised concerns about how long the state of emergency in the parish will last.
Members have reached out, a good number of members have reached out. Some of them are concerned because they're not sure what a state of emergency means. And then others are concerned. They want to know how long will it last. And that's a question we at the Chamber have. How long will this last? As you can imagine, there will be some impact on productivity and on commerce. And so, would like to know how much time are we looking at as we go through the state of emergency.
In the meantime, President of the Jamaica Manufacturers Association, Micha Siaga, says while he supports the move, he's urging the security forces to ensure they don't breach citizens' rights.
Well, as an association, we support the move by the Prime Minister. We feel that things have gotten completely out of hand and some drastic measures needed to be taken. Whilst we support it, we urge the security forces to act with restraint at all times and not to abuse any citizen of Jamaica's rights. But we can't continue the way we've been going.
At the same time, CEO of the private sector organization of Jamaica, Dennis Chung, says that the government must now consider other ways to ensure that lawlessness on the island decreases.
Go further to say that we think that the government needs to ensure that it looks at other follow-up action, when we look at the situation where from very light sentences were given for one crime that commit 8% of the murders, we need to look at those types of situations. We need to look at the legislation, surrounding some of these fines and penalties for some of these punishments.
For BATV News, I'm Kenil Gale.
And the Jamaica Chamber of Commerce, JCC, says it supports the state of emergency declared today. The JCC says the authorities must take urgent and bold measures to address the impact of crime and the danger to tourism and investment-driven growth. The JCC says the overwhelming majority of Jamaicans are resolved that the nation should not face another year of bloodletting. The Chamber says the state of emergency is appropriate in light of the grave danger posed by gangs and individuals who for too long been holding the country to ransom and threatening the gains made in the economy. And the Opposition People's National Party, PNP, is lending its qualified support to the state of emergency. In a statement this afternoon, the PNP says it will await the regulations governing the state of emergency, which are required to be placed before Parliament. The party is insisting that a robust, accessible, and viable mechanism to protect the rights of law-abiding citizens during the operations must be in place. The PNP says every effort must be made by the security forces to be vigilant, courageous, and determined in confronting the criminal threat, even as they protect the rights and interests of law-abiding citizens. And when we come back, the latest on public sector wage negotiations, hear what the finance minister is now saying. This and more after the break. Welcome back. They've already gotten enough. That's the word from Finance Minister Audley Shaw, who says the public sector is asking too much of the government in the ongoing wage negotiations. He says a large number of public sector workers have been taking home more money since the government raised the income tax threshold to $1.5 million last year. However, the minister says the unions representing public sector workers have opted to ignore that at the expense of derailing the island's economic growth. Andrew Laidley reports.
As public sector wage negotiations continue, Finance Minister Audley Shaw says he's working alongside the Prime Minister to bring a speedy resolution to the negotiations.
I don't want to negotiate in public, but the public must know the full information. I mean, I met with the Prime Minister today, and we'll be, over the next few weeks, we want to close this episode of negotiations with the public sector. Because life has to go on, work has to be done, people need to be more productive. We can't spend too much time haggling over wages.
The Finance Minister says the raise in the income tax threshold must be factored into the negotiations.
But it is important that we recognize everyone, including workers in the public sector. We cannot ignore the fact that the government made a bold decision to lift the income tax threshold from $594,000 to $1.5 million. And I can tell you that of the 79,000 people in the public sector, 67,000 of them directly benefited from this.
Minister Shaw is urging public sector workers to be fair in the negotiations, pointing out that they have already been given enough since he's taken office in 2016.
There are only 2,000 people got that range of increase from 0 to 5%. 10,000 got no increase because they were below the threshold. But 67,000 people got an increase of anywhere between 6% and 20%. 6% and 20%. All of a sudden in these negotiations, no, that no count. It cannot be. Because in addition to that range of 6 to 20% increase is the normal annual increment increase of 2.5%. And for police, 3%. So if we're going to negotiate, it can't just be about an offer of 3 and 3. Everything must be put into the discussion. Fair is fair, regardless of which government is in power.
For BATV News, I'm Andrew Laidley.
Meanwhile, the private sector organization of Jamaica, PSOJ, says it's encouraged by news that progress has been made on the wage negotiations between the government and public sector workers. The PSOJ says they understand the Prime Minister has intervened and instructed that creative ways be found to compensate workers where possible. The organization says they've always advocated for out-of-the-box methods to arrive at a win-win situation. However, they say these creative ways must not only be about finding available resources, but also include merit pay, which would result in greater productivity. The PSOJ is pointing to the police as an example where there should be an objective measurement based on the crime statistics and general law and order. They add that these objectives could be funded by the proceeds of crime, which in turn would reduce crime and allow the country to benefit from the 4 to 6% of GDP lost to crime each year. PSOJ President Howard Mitchell says the directive by the Prime Minister is encouraging. He says it's their hope that there can be a speedy resolution so the government can focus on growing the economy. Industry Minister Carl Samuda has announced changes to the scrap metal regime following the theft of millions of dollars of metal from a sugar factory. He's given instructions for the reinspection of all scrap metal containers that were packed for export after December 21. And the minister has added brass to the list of items banned from export. The measures follow the theft of 5 metric tons of brass sugar mill bearings from the Worthy Park Sugar Factory in St. Catherine. 74 brass bearings worth over $16 million were stolen from the factory between December 22 and January 11. A statement from the ministry says this is the second major theft of brass bearings from a sugar factory. A similar incident occurred in 2013 at the Money Musk factory in Clarendon. Minister Samuda says, in light of the ongoing threat to sugar factories, he's reviewed the scrap metal regime with the hope of getting the stolen brass bearings back in the short term and tightening the export regulations. In the meantime, a joint team from the Jamaica Customs Agency, the Factories Corporation of Jamaica, and the police are to investigate the Worthy Park theft. Scrap metal export sites have also been placed on high alert for brass sightings. NCB Financial Group is set to open a new banking and financial services center. The new center at 13 to 14 West Trade Way in Portmore is scheduled to open on January 22. The facility will provide banking, insurance, and investment services in a one-stop center. It replaces NCB's Portmore branch, which will move from its temporary location at 18 West Trade Way. The new center will also house Advantage General Insurance Company, a subsidiary of NCB Financial Group. NCB says the merger of services is part of the group's broader customer solutions strategy. And when we come back, we'll tell you what Mexicans in the U.S. are doing in anticipation of President Trump's immigration crackdown. This and more in regional and international news up next. Welcome back. Apple says it will pay $38 billion in taxes to the United States as it takes advantage of a discounted rate to move its massive cash pile back from abroad. The iPhone maker also announced a major investment in a new U.S. campus and an estimated overall boost of $350 billion for the American economy. Here's more.
A $350 billion contribution to the U.S. economy over the next 5 years. Apple has promised to spend the fruits of its labor at home in the largest commitment to domestic investment by an American company since last month's corporate tax reform was signed into law. Of the $350 billion pledged by the tech giant, $5 billion will go to its advanced manufacturing fund. Over $30 billion over the next 5 years will be spent on expanding U.S. operations and creating 20,000 jobs. And at least $55 billion a year for the next 5 years will go to its domestic suppliers and manufacturers, a $5 billion increase from last year that had already been planned. And finally, the amount also includes a $1 billion tax bill to repatriate its overseas profits. President Trump was quick to take credit for Apple's move, reminding everyone his policies would allow companies like Apple to bring massive amounts of money back to the United States, and it was great to see Apple follow through as a result of tax cuts. Apple says bringing its cash back home, which is estimated at over $250 billion, was partially due to President Trump's tax reform. Corporate income brought back to the United States is now taxed between 8 and 15.5%. Down from 35%. Corporate tax has also been lowered from 31 to 21% in a bid to boost wages, increase jobs, and accelerate economic growth.
Kenyans are big buyers of second-hand clothes at bargain prices. Thousands of tons are imported every year, but some have had enough and want to see their own textile industries make it big instead. Al Jazeera's Famida Miller reports from Nairobi.
Across Nairobi, there are many street markets like this one, where shoppers rummage through piles of second-hand clothes, bargaining for a good deal. Here at Toy Market, Felista and Tenya has been selling used clothes for 2 months, with prices ranging from as little as under $1 to about $5 an item. She says business is good.
Yeah, we are fond of those second-hand clothes.
We are fond of second-hand clothes. New clothes today are sometimes made from cheap material, but we rely on second-hand clothes because we know it's affordable and the quality is good.
Government figures show that in 2014, second-hand clothing contributed $95 million to the Kenyan economy. That grew to $128 million by 2016.
Oxfam says that in 2015, East Africa imported more than $150 million worth of second-hand clothes and shoes, mostly from the US and Europe. But cheap imported clothing hasn't made it easy for the local textile industry to grow, already struggling with poor facilities and a lack of money.
There are, however, a few exceptions. One of them is this factory, which produces mostly high-end clothing. Owner Jaswinder Bedi says this is necessary to ensure his business survives in a market where used clothes are so cheap.
So we would largely do business where it will be less, it'll have less impact of second-hand clothes. For example, the business that we would go into in the region would be corporate wear, uniforms. You can't expect a police uniform to be second-hand. It has to be brand new. So we found our own pockets.
Local industry leaders say while curbing the second-hand clothing market could help the domestic industry grow, the local textile industry has too few skilled workers, and it's also impacted by illegal imports from Asia and the Middle East. Some say a ban on the second-hand clothing market is not the solution.
Market-driven policies are what are better. What would really make a difference for the textile industry is if we actually drove competitiveness. Competitiveness in this area. Look at if you look at India, if you look at China, you look at Vietnam, Bangladesh, their textile markets are huge.
Those like Philista, who make a living from selling used clothes, say any sort of ban would mean thousands of people would lose their jobs, while others argue that as Africa's spending power increases, the lure of second-hand clothes will likely decline. Famida Miller, Al Jazeera, Nairobi.
Stay with us. Talking Stocks comes up next. Welcome back. It's time now for Talking Stocks. 47 stocks traded today, of which 16 advanced, 22 declined, and 9 traded firm. The main JSE index advanced by 1,681 points to close at 311,750. The junior index declined by 4 points to close at 2,698. Over 5.8 million units traded, valued at more than $181 million on the Jamaican dollar market. And on the US dollar market, over 78,000 units traded, valued at over 17,000 US dollars. Wasinka Group, with over 1 million units changing hands, accounted for 29% of market volume. Victoria Mutual Investments was second, with over 893,000 units trading. Jamaica Broilers Group accounted for 750,000 units, amounting to 12% of market volume. Main Event Entertainment Group was the top advancer, up 65 cents to close at $6.05, followed by JMMB Preference Shares, up 20 cents to close at $2, and Lasco Distributors, up 30 cents to close at $3.58. The main decliners were Mayberry Investments, down $1.03 to close at $5.77, followed by Paramount Trading, losing 47 cents to close at $3.03, and 1834 Investments, down 11 cents to close at $1.16. In foreign exchange trading, the Jamaican dollar lost ground on the US dollar and British pound today, but gained on the Canadian dollar. The US gained 23 cents to end the day at $125.03. The Canadian lost $1.38, closing the day at $98.84, while the British pound sold for $1.65 more today, ending at $172.86 on average. And that's the news, but before we go, a recap of our top story. Government declares state of emergency in St. James. The move has received the support of several leading business organizations, as well as the opposition People's National Party. Thanks for watching. For more content, visit our website at batvja.com. I'm Kalila Reynolds. Pleasant viewing.